What was the first television show you remember watching? Well, it would depend on your age, right? Having been born in the middle 1950s, my answer would be watching Dennis the Menace. There was, of course, Dennis and his best friend Tommy, his thorn in his side, Margaret, and of course, good old Mr. Wilson. The faces of those characters and actresses who portrayed them are etched in my memory. But there is so much more to that show. Here's some fascinating facts that I learned about Dennis the Menace over the years. Dennis the Menace was originally created, written, and illustrated by a Disney animator named Hank Ketcham. The daily cartoon strip debuted in 16 newspapers in March of 1951. By sheer coincidence, the British children's comic The Beano published its first strip in its very own Dennis the Menace on exactly the same day. The two strips were in no way related. However, subtle changes were made in the titles to avoid confusion in their home countries. By the end of the first year of syndication, Ketcham's strip was appearing in nearly 250 newspapers and reaching an estimated audience of 30 million. By the time of his death in 2001, Dennis was seen in over 1,000 newspapers in 48 countries and in 19 languages. Hank Ketcham had always wanted to be a cartoonist since he was 6 years old. At the age of 30, while working for Disney as an animator, he saw this dream of having his own comic strip slowly slipping away. However, the annex of his own son, Dennis, in October of 1950 would change that and their lives forever. As the story goes, little 4-year-old Dennis was supposed to be in his room taking a nap, but refusing to do so, he instead went through his room like a tornado and messed the entire room up. Frustrated by his actions, the boy's mother and Hank's first wife, Alice, burst into his studio and declared, "Your son is a menace." The label menace and the image of the tornado made a huge impression on Hank, and 5 months later, the first comic strip appeared. The comic strip was the first medium in which Dennis the Menace was unveiled. Since then, he has further been defined in the television series, a movie, cartoons, and even a video game. Now, Jay North was chosen from over 500 boys that auditioned for the role. But Jay North actually chose the person that played Margaret. He was at the casting callback of Janine Russell, and he saw her and actually liked the presentation that she did and said that he liked her as Margaret. Veteran actress Gloria Henry played Dennis's mother, Alice. Years earlier, with Columbia Pictures, she had a bitter disagreement with Harry Cohn. He actually told her that she would get another role at his studio over his dead body. While Harry was still alive, she tested for the series, and a few days later in Phoenix, Arizona, he dropped dead of a heart attack, and she got the part. For 4 seasons and 146 episodes, Jay North portrayed Dennis the Menace. He was an energetic, curious, and well-meaning boy. His good intentions, though, seemed to always turn out for the worst. His charisma and flair could never be doubted. They were actually contagious. That was the Jay North character that was in front of the camera. Off camera, behind the scenes, Jay now confesses that his life was a living hell. His mother was unable to be his guardian on location during filming. She had a full-time job. Well, his mother's sister and her husband acted in that role. In numerous interviews, he speaks of the physical and emotional abuse that he received from them, especially his aunt. He goes on to explain that he spent much of his time alone off camera. His aunt and uncle wouldn't allow him to play or mess around with other kids after filming. The TV shows Leave It to Beaver and Dennis the Menace have a special connection. In its first season, Leave It to Beaver received poor Nielsen ratings, so CBS let it go. However, ABC did pick it up for 5 more seasons. The cancellation left a hole in CBS's programming. It was searching for another series that was about the same adventures of a boy. The pilot of Dennis the Menace was filmed in late 1958, and throughout early 1959, other episodes were being filmed. Upon reviewing these episodes, CBS determined that the behavior of Dennis would need to be toned down. They didn't want to come across as encouraging that type of behavior in youngsters. CBS then gave the green light for the show, and it was aired on Sunday evenings after Lassie. Equally as important to the success of the show was the Mitchell's next-door neighbor, good old Mr. Wilson. Actor Joseph Carnes played the role of Mitchell's grouchy, always suspicious neighbor, George Wilson. Following the filming of the 100th episode in early February 1962, Kearns suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. He was immediately hospitalized, but never regained consciousness. He passed away 5 days later. Now, he appeared in 101 episodes from 1959 to 1962. His last work aired in May of 1962. The title of that episode was The Man Next Door. Following his unforeseen death during the 3rd season, the show's explanation of George Wilson was that he went on a trip to Ohio. While Mr. Wilson was away, his brother John, portrayed by Gale Gordon, came to take care of his house while he was away. The show's bold attempt to replace the missing Mr. Wilson character with an equally cranky relative was a noble one. However, the dynamics between Dennis and the second Mr. Wilson was not the same. For the first time, the series dropped out of the top 30 during season 4. Jay North was beginning to age, and his childish shenanigans didn't seem to fly as well. In early 1963, the show was canceled. Between stints of finishing school and later serving in the U.S. Navy, Jay North did find work in front of the camera. The work was mostly in television, but also in some minor films. Most notably has been his efforts and work with fellow former child star Paul Peterson. Paul was Jeff Stone on the Donna Reed Show. He has championed Paul's organization, which is called A Minor Consideration. Through the family, education, and personal counseling, they support child stars who are in crisis. Now, there were some pretty interesting guest stars that made appearances on Dennis the Menace. Ron Howard was one. Before he was Opie on the Andy Griffith Show, he was Dennis's friend Stuart in 6 episodes. Jean Stapleton, the future Miss Archie Bunker of All in the Family, appeared in 1 episode in 1962 as Flora Davis. Sandy Koufax, the future Hall of Fame baseball player, made a cameo appearance in 1962. Mel Blanc, the man of 1,000 voices, appeared in 1 episode in 1961. Eleanor Donahue, she's best remembered in her roles as Betty Anderson, the eldest child of Jim and Margaret Anderson, in the 1950s sitcom Father Knows Best, and probably as I know her best from Ellie Walker in the Andy Griffith Show during the 1st season. With these interesting facts, we hope Dennis the Menace is even a more fond memory to you. Thank you so much for watching.